In a world full of distractions, there is one big question on every dog owner's lips.
How do I become more than just the person holding the other end of the leash?
We all get dogs with a dream in mind, a vision of the future. And if right now your everyday reality isn't quite that picture you had in mind, you are in the right place.
It really doesn't have to be this way.
You absolutely can and will be more to your dog than just the person who gets in between them and the world.
The key is you need to be more sexy.
More sexy than the neighbourhood cat.
More sexy than the jogger in the park.
More sexy than that half-eaten hamburger they just found on the floor.
And yes, even more sexy than the dog across the road.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Lauren.
Together we're Absolute Dogs.
And you're listening to the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Sexier Than a Squirrel, the podcast that teaches you how to become sexier than the squirrel to your dog.
Now, today it's a big one, right, Tom? Because recall is just one of those areas that people don't just struggle with. They actually get themselves pretty stressed or, let's say, stretched in this area. And actually, it's a reason for many dogs to have zero freedom at all.
Yeah, and in fact, it's kind of like it's almost like something that is the bottleneck in a lot of people's relationships, a lot of people's kind of time that they want to spend with their dogs. And if we're thinking that like every interaction that we have with our dog could be a relationship investment or a relationship withdrawal, one of the most common interactions that we might have with them is, hey, can you come over here? And if they say no, well, that's a bit of a limiter on a relationship.
Now, let's strip it right back to actually what is a recall or what's it actually about. And I know that when we've been training dogs in person here at the site and working with dogs together, one of the biggest things we see people struggle with is just having general close proximity from their dogs. Actually, proximity is kind of the root and the foundation of all of this. And actually, it's kind of where the pain point starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the way that, you can think about a recall in a couple of different ways. But the main thing that you want to think is that if you needed to get your dog back, you could get them back. And that's not to say that actually you need to ever get them back, because one of the things that a recall's based on, and like what is like a foundation for us, is actually proximity. So do they desire being close? Do they love being close? Do they have value for being close? And if so, then are they hanging around? Because if they're hanging around, then actually it kind of totally gets rid of the need for a recall. And then if you do need to recall them, how about the recall is just an invitation to come to this like super cool place, which is proximity?
Now, I know that recently we were working with a very naughty monkey Labrador called Monty, right? And the more I worked with Monty, the more I realized that actually it wasn't really recall that was the struggle. It was proximity, because if I was recalling him, that was normally because he had gone at a great distance. Yeah. And ultimately what we were looking for was close proximity and hanging out in proximity zone. And just to give an example of the pain points that Monty's owner was going through was embarrassment, disappointment, all of the reasons that she got her dog in the first place. She is a lovely owner, an exceptional owner, in fact. And all of the reasons that she got him in the first place, to have stress-free walks, to have strolls along the beach, to be able to go out with her friends, maybe take a coffee, enjoy the finer moments in life, actually have a bit of a breath, really, be able to walk and take a breath. All of those moments were taken away with just having no recall. Like that was the pain point. Like actually it became quite painful for her.
And so if we were to think about, if we say that proximity, and this is kind of our first little like takeaway from this podcast today, if we say that proximity is absolutely fundamental to a great recall, well, how do you build proximity? Well, there are kind of a few different elements to this. The first one is value. Like, where is your dog getting their value in the world? And for sure, the world and the environment, it has a lot of value that it can give your dog, right? It can give your dog great games of chase. It can give your dog great scents and hunting and whatever else. And actually what you've got to think is, well, what value do you have a level of influence over? And for sure, it's going to be their daily food allowance. It's going to be how they spend their energy. It's going to be, discovering what they love doing. Like if they love doing chase, how can we incorporate chase into our interactions with our dogs? That is going to boost the value of proximity, right?
And straight away with Monty, we saw that proximity was kind of like, if there was anything else around and you guys listening might recognize this: dogs, people, picnics, noises, children, like all of those things would diminish any proximity that he had with us, and actually encourage him to go further and further and further. So proximity was number one. And proximity, I mean, we like to think of proximity as power or potential power, let's say. Actually, that was our number one area to work. And so number one, we delivered all of his food in close proximity. So there was no like you going over there, or no you having a bowl in the corner over there. It was all delivered close, right? That was really important.
And then the second way that we can boost proximity is going to actually be variety. So one of the reasons why our dogs love the environment is actually because there are so many different things they can do out there.
Let's think of the squirrel, right? Like the squirrel, he is so sexy.
Yeah.
Like he really is.
He might dart one way, he might dart the other way.
He swishes his tail.
Yeah, absolutely. He might give a cheeky grin. I don't know. Don't know if he does that, but maybe he does. And so, he's got a lot of tools in his armory that he can use. And often as dog owners, we get a little bit kind of limited to one tool, which is delivering a piece of food to the mouth, and then we're surprised when the squirrel has like his full like armory of super cool moves that he can do,
and he's out like jumping. He jumps from tree to tree. He sort of darts under something.
He appears at random, or when you least expect him, or when you least want him. And so understanding that first of all it's about value and building that value, and secondly that there needs to be variety in the value. If you have a friend and you always have the same conversation with that friend where they just forget that they've told you a story, and you hear the same story over and over again, do you want to spend time with that friend? Do you find yourself looking forward to that interaction? Well, no, because you know the story, right?
And none of us, let's be honest, nobody wants to be bored, right? Like nobody wants to, like variety is important in all of our lives. Like whether that's for example, I have a salad I really love. I ate it for about 10 days in a row a few weeks ago. I don't want that salad anymore, Tom. Like I'm done with it. And yet it's a salad I really liked. I just gave myself too much of it. And sometimes there is too much of a good thing in that, right? Like
absolutely.
The variety. So let's be practical with everybody. When we think about variety and exactly how we can reinforce, let's think about, we could play maybe a little bit of thunder. So the food could go through our legs. We could maybe do a little bit of leg weave. We could do a bit of magic hand and catching. Some of the games that we play in the training academy. Yeah. So those types of games.
And even down to actually, there are multiple ways to deliver one piece of food. Like, I think as humans, we get a little bit obsessed with the object. Like, oh, it's a piece of food. The only way that we can add variety to this piece of food is the taste or how hungry our dog is. Actually, a lot of the time, our dogs are not that hungry, and that's totally fine. And it's about they're there for the experience, not because we're delivering something that is like satisfying one of their needs, which is a bit depressing.
I do remember being at a restaurant a good few years ago now, probably way before I could appreciate it, and it was like a fine dining restaurant abroad, and I remember thinking, what is this about? Like these tiny little morsels of food that are in this different sort of layout. And actually now when I look back on it, it was one of those fine dining moments that you're supposed to appreciate, and yet at the same time, like for me, that's kind of the experience you're looking to deliver with your dog. It's that like this experience, that experience. I didn't really understand at the time quite how relevant it was, but I loved even just the layout or the look or the variety or the fact that you had so many different ones. Like those were all cool, even though I did feel like we needed more food. Either way, you know what, the fine dining experience is what we're looking at with our dogs, right? Versus McDonald's.
Absolutely. And so the final kind of piece of this proximity puzzle has got to be that sure, we're building value and we're building the positives and we're paying the positives into that proximity bank account, but then we have to be careful not to make withdrawals that are unnecessary. So, for example, some dogs learn very quickly that coming in close means that they get put back on lead.
And another one that so many dogs learn, and I definitely have seen this with dogs that we've had at the training centre, is coming back in means you need to get in the car. And a lot of dogs who don't like the vehicle find that a relationship withdrawal, because actually, especially the young dogs or the dogs who are like motion sick or not enjoying the experience of being in a vehicle, or just actually don't want to be crated or haven't had the value put into a crate or into safe travel. And we definitely do suggest dogs travel safely, and yet so many dogs haven't had that conditioning. It's a relationship withdrawal. The dog comes back, they get put on the lead and they get put into motion, which is something they don't enjoy.
Yeah, or even down to something as subtle as actually some dogs don't like to be reached, or don't like to be kind of reached towards and get hold of their collar or their harness or whatever.
Or some dogs don't like to be picked up.
They don't like to be picked up. And so our little tip for this side of things in building proximity is actually, let's teach a behavior or a game, you could, however you want to call it, where actually our dogs come in close, we can clip them on lead, and we're not having to handle them and make it a bad deal. And of course, that game that we like to play is one called Middle, and that's where we get our dogs to come around our legs, between our legs, and they either, if they're not too big, then they can stand, and if they are a bit big, then you know what, they can do that and go into a down. This is possible with any size dog. We've seen the videos. This is possible.
Dogs all over the world. We're talking what were we training the other day? Beautiful Newfoundlands.
Yeah.
So we've had Newfoundlands down to Chihuahuas. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know what? A Newfoundland can go into Middle, but they just have to go do a down at the same time. And then all we're doing is we're literally clipping their lead while maybe we're just dropping some food on the floor, so that it's like a non-event, and it's not punishing, and it's not a bad deal for them. And often we take it for granted that our dogs should come hardwired to know that they walk on a lead, how to walk on a lead, and that actually they're meant to wear this thing around their neck that we call a collar. Actually, none of that is hardwired. None of that is like a given, and we should grow them and inspire them. Otherwise, when we think we're rewarding our dogs, we could actually be making it a really bad deal. So they're kind of our top 3 tips for proximity.
Just to add to that one really quickly, the other one I was thinking, Tom, there is actually when I'm walking, one thing I try really hard not to do is pair those 2 events closely. So if I'm going to put a dog into the vehicle that doesn't necessarily like being in the vehicle at the moment, whilst I'm working on the vehicle, gaining some sort of confidence and strength, I'll also pop them on lead somewhere separate, so I don't make the vehicle the place of popping them on lead. Or say, for example, the dog doesn't like to be handled and grabbed, they might trail a long line for a little bit, or I might put them on, put them off, put them on, put them off. So it's not like a predictable schedule of this is how it goes, and they don't pair that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So this story kind of sums up just how smart dogs are. I once had a behavior consult where the lady was like, I don't understand it. Every time, and I can do different routes, but every time I've decided and I know that we're going home, no matter the route that I take, my dog runs away and I cannot get them back. And yet they're really close to me up until this point, and I don't understand it. And I was like, well, what do you do leading up to that? And she says, well, my husband drops me off, and when it comes to me being ready to come home, I've done my route and I vary it. Don't you worry, I vary this route. When I come to need to be picked up, I give him a call to let him know where I am.
So the dogs are just brilliant, aren't they? I mean, it's so... And it seems so obvious when you listen, and at the same time, I think
probably all do these things that actually our dogs are very good studies of.
As simple as just literally taking your lead over your shoulders. Yeah. So if you have your lead around, I often walk with a lead like around my neck, and I'll take the lead over my shoulders. My dogs know that probably means something. So sometimes taking that lead over and putting it back, or taking that lead over, putting them on lead, letting them off lead, and then putting it back on your neck. Like not making it so this is exactly how it goes. Like ditch the routine on a major scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So proximity is kind of this first foundation that we've got to think about, and we've got to grow, and we've got to build. And then the second kind of foundation that we've got to think about and we've got to grow, actually with a recall, it sounds crazy, but it's got to be some level of calmness, right?
Yeah, and for us, it's like a foundation layer of having a dog who's in the right headspace, who's in the right place to be able to learn.
It's like sometimes people will say to us, oh, we the thing that we need to work on is a recall. And then in talking to them, we discover that actually the problem started before they've even left the house, because they've got their walking boots on, they've got their training jacket on, their
running
walking
around
jacket
doing zoomies,
and the dog's like barking and jumping at them. And I think that dog probably wouldn't be able to do a sit or a down, or it's like the lights are on but no one's home, because they're so excited about this walk.
Then we go out expecting them to be able to deal with that sexy squirrel and everything else that's out and about there, and yet they actually couldn't even get to the doorway without salivating, barking, yapping, jumping, nipping, spinning, circling, and all of those things are kind of there in place. And let's be honest, the recall is really, the more we reframe it and think about it, the recall really is only proximity and calmness. Like those are very, very simple. If we have proximity and calmness, then really we would never need to be.
You probably don't even need to ever tell your dog to do anything if you've got those 2 things, right? So it's really exciting that we can inspire these things that are sure they're going to help our dog to listen, but actually it also takes away the need for our dog to listen because they're behaving entirely appropriately. So in terms of how we build calmness, first step that we'd think about is we'd get rid of the predictability around a walk. Like one of the biggest kind of enemies of calmness is anticipation.
In fact, I've got a brilliant example of this earlier, Tom. Matt and I were out walking. We hopped up onto the moors, and we got there. It was actually really busy, and there were many campers there, and it was just chaos. And we kind of looked at each other and we went, actually, we might just come home and walk in the fields because it's calmer here. And it was one of those moments of predictability. The dogs had got in the car, we hop up to the moors. Their expectation is we get to the moors and we let them out and we all go for a big long hike and run. What we did was we got to the moors, we sat there for 10 minutes, we chatted for a bit, and then we went back home and let them out at home. Like, it's actually those moments of ditching the routine within our walk framework, right?
And in fact, if every time you go for a walk, very exciting things happen, or even mildly exciting things happen, then it's in the dog's interests as like an animal of efficiency to prepare themselves for that excitement and to anticipate it. It's like, you never go to a nightclub and have a nap.
Or in your pajamas.
Or in your pajamas. And so you go into the nightclub in a very different headspace than if you, say, go to the spa, where typically you don't do anything, you don't have access to your phone. And so in the spa environment, you can be calm and you can be thoughtful and mindful and whatever else. And actually,
I can't imagine being in a nightclub being like showing gratitude and making great like meditation moments. No. And it's just the wrong. It's not conducive to it, right? The environment's not set up for it.
Exactly. And the headspace is set before you enter the environment based on past experience. So that's kind of our second like overall concept that we need to think about in growing the recall. And yet still, we've not actually talked about training a recall.
And I think let's think really quickly on calm there, Tom. Like, just if we do a quick like tips tennis on calm, let's think number one is actually how are they living 24/7? Because really the walk is only such a fine sort of small like tiny hello you it's a tiny part of that that moment, isn't it? It's not a long part of the it's the walk's tiny, it's minute. And actually living with that dog 24/7, what are they doing 24/7? Like, what's happening 24/7?
And then thinking then, if we're going for a walk, well, let's actually do calm things. And calm things might look like sitting on a bench, on lead, calmly feeding your dog. Have you ever been for a walk and giving your dog like a long-lasting chew? No, because it kind of goes against what we think a walk is, right?
Have you ever been for your walk and actually, like we said, not got out and actually stayed there, written your emails maybe, and then driven back home again? Yeah. Not actually doing the thing that is expected. I've done that so many times with the hydro pool we used to use, because we were having issues that we got to hydro pool and the dogs were in a mess before they even got there. And then I thought, well, actually, is this productive? Is this what I'm looking for? No, I'm looking for like mental health and fitness here for dogs, like that their stamina's good, fitness, and that they're in a good headspace. This is not good if they're salivating and screaming before they even get in the doorway.
And then the kind of final piece of this calmness puzzle has got to be actually, well, to a certain extent, a walk will be exciting. And if we have walks every day, day in, day out, that excitement only builds and our dogs never get time to calm down. So actually, let's ditch the walks some days. Let's not even go for a walk so that they have that opportunity to actually come back down to a calm state before the next one.
Actually, as an owner, giving yourself that permission that today is not the day I go for a long hike is I think is a gift for an owner. And the other thing I think it really serves well for is like there's going to be a day that your dog's lame. There's going to be a day that your dog's a little bit stiff or sore, or that you're a little bit lame and stiff or sore. You know what? Those days you actually have permission to do something else with your dog. That doesn't mean they don't get some sort of physical or mental well-being training, whether that's games from the training academy or the Squirrel challenge or something that you're doing with your dog. At the same time, that doesn't mean they have to go out on a proper hike. You don't have to get your boots on and your backpack on and get them out hiking 3 times a day. That I love that we've reframed what a walk means.
Absolutely. And then the final piece of this puzzle, I guess, is actually training and inspiring this recall. And so one of the kind of key elements to that is we play a game, and that game a lot of people see as like a strict exercise, but it really is a game that inspires a recall, and that is a retrieve, right?
A retrieve is so powerful because any dog who brings something back is a dog who's actively interacting with recall. So they're actively prompting recall, and it's a relationship boost, and it's a moment for good rehearsal. And I think that's, just to touch on that, that's a point that we should make, is that let's limit poor rehearsal and let's encourage good rehearsal. And retrieve is really good rehearsal. Ping out, come back, ping out, come back. Like it's a lots and lots of resets for retrieving and coming back to our close proximity.
It's saying go interact with the world and then come back to me, and I am part of this game, right?
Yeah. And
so even if your dog doesn't like toys or doesn't really interact with toys, you can absolutely train a retrieve. And you know what, you can go out and practice a retrieve right now by quite simply throwing a piece of food out there. Your dog comes back to you, you reward them in hand, and you throw another piece of food out there. They're ping-ponging between the environment and you, and so you're building a recall, you're building a retrieve, you're building value in proximity, you're building calmness. And what you find is that you enter this cycle where instead of it being a vicious cycle of deterioration, you're actually in like a positive spin cycle at this point.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing with that is it's all doable in the house. You're rehearsing good experience, and you're limiting bad experience, and you're limiting what you don't want. And I think that's one point I'd love to everyone to leave on, I suppose, is knowing that don't rush to put your dog out in the big wide world making poor choices. Actually, the thing we want to do is rehearse and frame all of those good choices. And I think that's the thing we see so often with, so I don't want to go into socialization, but people socializing their dogs so much and so early, is that actually they practice very early on running off, interacting with the world way more than they interact with what's close. Let's teach retrieve, let's teach brilliant proximity, let's have a framework of calmness, let's keep all of those things sort of well rehearsed and not what we don't want.
It's like they say, abs are made in the kitchen. A great recall is made at home, not on the walk. Now, one of the biggest things that we get asked is, well, is there a step-by-step of how I can build this like proximity, this calmness, this engagement, this recall, this retrieve? And so after a lot of demand, we actually put something together. It's called the Sexier Than a Squirrel Challenge, a 25-day worldwide Sexier Than a Squirrel Challenge. And as a podcast listener, you can actually get over 70% discount on this 25-day program, where it's a game a day for 25 days to take you from where you are right now to that day that you are sexier than a squirrel. And the way that you can get involved in that is by going to absolutedogs.me/sexy. That's absolutedogs.me/sexy. And we'd be excited to share with you the games to grow this in the challenge.
I think the exciting thing with the challenge and the games is that everybody can access it in a way that you can do it in a small space, in your living room. I think this is the big thing. And I think this is I suppose it's dispelling the myth that a recall is like, I don't know, when I was growing up, some of the trainers when I was growing up, it was like very much like dog out there, comes back, gets fed. And that was the only thing we really knew to do.
It's such a bad deal if you think about it, right?
And it also set the dog up to be away. Yeah. So you have to let the dog be away to be able to bring them all that way back. And for me, it was a lot of punishment involved, and there was a lot of setting them up to fail in the framework. What I love about the challenge and what I love about what we get to do now is that it's all around games. It's inspired with games. It's inspired with energy, and there's a lot of creativity there, because we have, at the end of the day, let's say, creative dogs, right? Like absolutely. We have many creative dogs.
And the cool thing is that often people will have you believe that your breed of dog can't be trained.
Let's say Huskies or Malamutes, or let's say
Jack Russell Terriers,
Beagle.
or whatever it might be. And the crazy thing is these people will have you believe this, but we know it to not be the case, because over 20,000 people have been through the Sexier Than a Squirrel Challenge.
And Tom said 20,000 people. That's
all
how
different
many
breeds, all different ages.
Huge success with it, huge success. And we've had anything from Newfoundlands to Dog de Bordeaux to, really every breed.
Romanian street dogs, literally everything. And people are seeing success after success. So if you want to get involved in that, it's absolutedogs.me/sexy. We'd love to share with you on that one. And the key here is, guys, that what we want to really stress in this episode of the podcast is that a great recall is built on a foundation of loving being close. It's built on a foundation of calmness. The rest is just the icing on the cake. The rest is the easy bit.
It's built on that foundation of, actually, it's a good deal for your dog to be close, right? Like making it a good deal.
They should be punching you in the face saying, let me recall.
It's an easy choice, right? Like it's an easy choice. It shouldn't be a difficult choice for your dog to be close. Your dog should actively know that being close is the best place to be.
So that was this episode of the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast. It was all about recall. There's a lot of actionable tips for you to go away and play around with there. And what we'd say is that actually just invest some of that daily food allowance in what we've talked about. See what happens, discover the results for yourself.
Ditch the bowl, right? Ditch the routine. Have a lot of fun with it. Keep rewarding proximity. Keep actioning close proximity.
It's totally within your control. Rip the labels that other people have put on your dog off your dog. That was this episode of the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast. And remember, stay sexy. Hey, before you go, have you taken part in the worldwide Sexier Than a Squirrel challenge?
It's a 25-day online video program, huge energy, amazing community, and over 6,000 people are already taking part.
The only question is, you know where you are today. Where do you want to be 25 days from now? Head to absolutedogs.me/sexy.